The silence in the room was not empty. It was heavy, like a thick blanket that had been thrown over everything. It pressed against the floor-to-ceiling glass windows of the high-rise apartment, separating the perfect, still world inside from the noisy, chaotic city far below. This was Julian's world. It was a world of order, of straight lines, and of absolute quiet. The only thing allowed to break this silence was the sound of the grand piano. Julian sat at the instrument, his back straight, his posture perfect. He was a man who looked like he was made of marble, cold, hard, and unbreakable. He was famous, known all over the world as a genius of the piano. People said his fingers were magic. They said he could make the piano sing like no one else. But if you watched him closely, you would see that he wasn't singing. He was calculating. To Julian, music was not about feelings. It was about math. It was about hitting the right notes at the exact right time with the exact right amount of pressure. There was no room for mistakes. There was no room for mess. He struck a chord. It was sharp and clear. Then he stopped. He frowned. It wasn't perfect. The sound hadn't decayed at the exact millisecond he wanted it to. He hit the key again, harder this time. Then again, he was obsessed. He spent 10 hours a day sitting on that bench, chasing a sound that didn't exist. He wanted to be so perfect that the music would stop being music and become something else, something pure. But this obsession had a cost. While Julian could play the most difficult pieces ever written, he couldn't take care of himself. He didn't know how to cook. He didn't know how to clean. He didn't even know how to fix a loose button on his shirt. His life was the piano, and everything else was just a distraction. Because of this, his beautiful, expensive apartment was starting to suffer. Dust gathered in the corners of the ceiling. The kitchen counters were sticky from forgotten takeout containers. The air smelled stale, like old paper and closed windows. Julian's manager had told him he needed help. "You can't live in a pigsty while you play for kings," the manager had said. So, Julian had agreed, reluctantly, to hire someone. He didn't want a person. He wanted a machine that could clean. He wanted someone who would come in, move like a ghost, fix the mess, and leave without him ever having to say a word. That is why Alina was there. Alina stood in the doorway of the living room, holding a bucket of soapy water and a bag of cleaning supplies. She was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners and rough hands that had worked hard all her life. She lived in a small apartment on the other side of the city, a place where the walls were thin and you could hear your neighbors arguing at night. She was used to noise. She was used to life being messy and unpredictable. Standing in Julian's living room felt like stepping into a different planet. Everything was white. The sofas were white. The rugs were white. The curtains were white. And in the center of the room, shining like a black jewel, was the piano. It was the only dark thing in the room, and it seemed to pull all the light toward it. Alina looked around nervously. She had been warned by the agency that the client was difficult. "He is a musician," the agency woman had said. "He needs total concentration. Do not speak to him unless he speaks to you. Do not touch his music sheets. Do not touch the piano." Alina looked at the piano. She didn't know much about classical music. She knew the tunes she heard on the radio, and she knew the songs her grandmother used to hum while she baked bread. But she didn't know Beethoven from Bach. To her, the piano just looked like a beautiful, expensive piece of furniture that was too sacred to sit on. Julian didn't even turn his head when she walked in. He knew she was there, but he acted as if she were part of the furniture lamp that had just decided to walk across the room. He lifted his hands and began to play again. It was a fast, complicated run of notes, like a storm of hail hitting a tin roof. It was impressive, but it was also cold. Alina felt a chill just listening to it. It didn't make her want to tap her foot. It made her want to hold her breath. She decided to start cleaning the far side of the room, trying to be as quiet as a mouse. She took out her duster and began to wipe the shelves. She moved slowly, carefully watching the man at the piano. He wore a gray shirt that looked expensive, but wrinkled, and his hair was messy, like he had been running his hands through it for hours. He looked tired, deep down tired, like someone carrying a heavy rock up a hill that never ended. As she worked, Julian stopped playing suddenly. The silence rushed back into the room, louder than before. He grabbed a pencil and scribbled furiously on a piece of paper on the music stand. Alina froze, thinking he was going to yell at her for making noise. But he wasn't looking at her. He was fighting with the music. He erased something, gritting his teeth, and then played the same 3 notes over and over and over again. Ding, ding, ding. Ding, ding, ding. It was maddening. Alina felt her own shoulders tightening up. He was looking for something in those notes, some kind of perfection that refused to be found. She felt a strange urge to tell him to just relax, to just play it and let it be wrong. But she remembered the rules. Don't speak. She moved to the windows. The city was spread out below them, a gray grid of buildings and traffic. It was a rainy afternoon, and water was running down the glass like tears. She started to spray the glass with cleaner. The hiss of the spray bottle cut through the air like a knife. Julian's head snapped up. He glared at her. "I am sorry," Alina whispered, lowering the bottle. "I will be quieter." He didn't say anything. He just stared at her for a second with eyes that looked like ice, and then turned back to the piano. He began to play again, but this time he was playing louder, angrier. It was as if he was trying to drown her out. He was trying to prove that his world was louder and more important than her small spray bottle. Alina sighed softly. She felt bad for him. It seemed like such a lonely way to live. She had grandchildren, and when they made noise, it made her feel alive. When a pot clattered in the kitchen, it meant food was cooking. When someone laughed, it meant there was happiness. Here, there was only the pressure to be perfect. It felt like a vacuum, sucking all the joy out of the air. She continued to work. She scrubbed the floors. She organized the books that were piled up on the tables. Julian barely moved. He sat on that bench for hours, only stopping to drink water or write more notes. He didn't eat. He didn't stretch. He was a machine. At one point, Alina had to vacuum the rug. She looked at the piano, terrified of the noise. She unplugged the vacuum and carried it to the outlet farthest away from him. She turned it on. The roar of the motor filled the room. Immediately, Julian stopped playing. He didn't look at her. He just sat there, his hands hovering over the keys, his body tense with irritation. He waited, his foot tapping impatiently on the pedal. Alina hurried. She didn't do the thorough job she usually did. She just wanted to get the machine turned off. She raced over the rug, her heart pounding, feeling his glare burning into her back. She clicked it off. The silence returned. "Thank you," Julian said. It wasn't a polite thank you. It was the way you would tell a dog to stop barking. His voice was flat and dry. "You are welcome," Alina said softly. She finished the rest of her cleaning in silence, using a broom and a dustpan instead of the vacuum. She wiped down the counters in the kitchen, which were covered in coffee stains. She threw away the empty takeout boxes. She found a dirty plate near the piano and carefully picked it up, trying not to disturb him. As she reached for it, Julian lifted one hand off the keys, just enough to move the plate out of her reach, still playing with his other hand. He didn't want her near his space. He didn't want her breath on his music. Alina stepped back. She realized that to him, she was invisible. She wasn't a person with a name or a life. She was just a cleaning lady, a nuisance that had to be tolerated to keep his white world white. She packed up her bag. Her back ached from bending over, and her hands smelled of lemon cleaner. She looked at the piano one last time. It was beautiful, she admitted that. The wood was polished to a shine. It looked like a black mirror. But it also looked sad. It looked like it was waiting for someone to play it who actually enjoyed it. "Goodbye, Mr. Thorne," she said quietly. Julian didn't answer. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't even blink. He was already lost in his world of dots and lines on a page, searching for a perfection that didn't exist. Alina walked out the heavy door and closed it gently. As soon as she stepped into the hallway, the noise of the world hit her again. The elevator dinged. A dog barked in a neighbor's apartment. The traffic outside honked. It was chaotic and loud, but as Alina walked toward the elevator, she took a deep breath and smiled. The silence in that apartment was too heavy for her. She preferred the noise. At least the noise was real. Inside the apartment, Julian sat alone. He listened to the silence settle back around him like a cocoon. He felt safe again. He felt in control. He struck a chord, listening to the sound fade away, counting the seconds until it was gone. He was alone with his greatness. And he was completely, utterly miserable, though he would never admit it, not even to himself. He thought the silence was his friend, but it was actually his cage. And neither of them knew that soon, the key to that cage would be found in the most unexpected place. The heavy front door clicked shut, and the sound echoed through the apartment like a gunshot in a library. Julian was gone. He had left in a swirl of gray coat and irritation, muttering something about needing air and better coffee. Alina let out a long breath she felt like she had been holding for the last 3 hours. The air in the room seemed to change instantly. The sharp, prickly feeling of Julian's intense focus faded away, leaving the apartment feeling large, empty, and strangely peaceful. Alina stood in the middle of the living room, holding a feather duster. She looked around. The sun was beginning to set, casting long golden shadows across the white floor. It was beautiful, in a cold sort of way, like a picture in a magazine. But it felt lifeless. Without the angry energy of the pianist, the place felt like a museum exhibit that nobody visited. She decided to finish the cleaning in the music room. This was the room where Julian spent most of his time, and consequently, it was the room that needed the most attention. There were crumpled papers scattered near the bin, eraser shavings on the carpet, and a fine layer of dust on the shelves that held his music collection. Alina put on her yellow rubber gloves and got to work. She hummed softly to herself as she wiped down the shelves. It was an old habit, one that helped her move with a rhythm as she worked. She found herself looking at the piano more and more. Up close, it was even more magnificent than it looked from a distance. The black finish was so deep and shiny that she could see her own distorted reflection in the side of it. It looked like a sleeping beast. The keys were white, bright, and clean, waiting for fingers to bring them to life. Alina knew she wasn't supposed to touch it. The warning from the agency rang in her ears. Do not touch the piano. Do not go near it. But she was curious. She had seen the man play, and she had heard the sound, but she didn't understand how it worked. How did pressing those little white and black keys make a sound that could fill a whole concert hall? To her, it was a kind of magic. She finished dusting the bookshelf and moved closer to the instrument. She stopped humming. The silence in the room felt heavy now, pressing against her ears. She looked at the music stand. It was covered in black notes rows and rows of little ants crawling on lines. It looked confusing and difficult. It looked like homework Alina had never learned to read music. She grew up in a house where you didn't learn music from a book. You learned it by listening. Her father had played an old beat-up guitar in the living room. Her neighbors would come over on weekends, and someone would bring a drum, someone else would bring a violin, and they would play for hours. They played folk songs, dance tunes, and sad ballads. They played from the heart. If someone forgot a note, they just made up a new one. Nobody minded. The music was for laughing, for crying, for dancing together. She looked at the pristine piano and then down at her own hands. They were rough and red from the cleaning chemicals. Her fingernails were short and practical. These were hands that scrubbed floors and carried groceries, not hands that belonged in a palace of music. Just one sound, she whispered to the empty room. Just to see what it feels like. It wasn't a plan to play a song. It was just a curiosity, like wanting to touch a smooth stone in a river. She pulled off her yellow gloves and set them on the bench. Her bare fingers felt cold in the air. She reached out and extended her right index finger. She hesitated for a moment, feeling a little thrill of fear that Julian might burst back in. But then she pressed down on a key in the middle of the keyboard. Clang. The sound was bright and clear. It rang out into the quiet room and vibrated against her fingertip. Alina smiled. It was a friendly sound. It didn't bite. She pressed another key, then another. She played a simple, wandering melody, just picking notes that sounded nice together. It wasn't a song anyone knew, but it had a sweetness to it. Then she remembered a tune. It was a song her grandmother used to play on an old upright piano they had in the basement when Alina was a little girl. It was a ragtime tune, bouncy and fast, full of jumps and surprises. Her grandmother used to laugh when she played it, her foot tapping hard on the floor. Alina sat down on the bench. The leather was cool and smooth. She flexed her fingers, trying to loosen them up. She placed her left hand down low on the keys and her right hand in the middle. She took a deep breath. She started to play. At first it was a little rusty. Her fingers stumbled over the keys, searching for the right spots. But within a few seconds, the muscle memory from her childhood came back. Her left hand began to play a steady, bouncing rhythm oompa, oompa, oompa. Her right hand jumped in with a cheerful melody. It wasn't perfect. Not even close. Her timing was a bit off in places. She hit a few wrong notes that clanged awkwardly, but she didn't stop to fix them. She just kept going, rolling over the mistakes like a car driving over a bump in the road. The music spilled out of the piano, filling the white, sterile room with color. It was messy and loud and utterly alive. Alina closed her eyes and let her hands do the work. She wasn't thinking about the notes. She was thinking about the summer festivals in the park. It's the smell of roasting corn and the feeling of holding hands with her first boyfriend at a dance. The music swung and swayed. It had a kick to it, a heartbeat that made you want to move your head. For a few minutes, the cold apartment wasn't a high-end loft in the city anymore. It was a warm kitchen full of people. The silence that Julian loved so much was gone, chased away by the rhythm of the ragtime. Alina started to play louder. She found the pedals at her feet. She didn't really know how to use them properly, but she pressed the loud pedal anyway just to see what would happen. The sound blossomed, rich and full. She laughed out loud. It was fun. It was so much more fun than scrubbing floors or being quiet. She felt powerful. She wasn't just the cleaning lady anymore. She was a musician. She played a fast run of notes, sliding her fingers across the ivory, pretending she was a fancy pianist in a concert hall. In her head, the audience was clapping. She imagined wearing a beautiful dress instead of her blue cleaning uniform. She imagined Julian, the grumpy master, sitting in the front row with his mouth open in surprise. The song built up to a chaotic, happy climax. Her left hand was thumping out the beat, and her right hand was dancing over the high notes. She was swaying back and forth on the bench, her eyes closed, a huge grin on her face. She hit the final chord with both hands, a loud, joyful crash that echoed through the room. She held her hands in the air for a second, savoring the sound as it faded away. Then she let out a breath and opened her eyes. The room looked different. The golden light was still coming through the windows, but the piano didn't look like a cold, black beast anymore. It looked like a friend. The silence that returned wasn't heavy anymore. It was a satisfied silence, like after a good meal. Alina looked at her hands. They were trembling a little bit, but from excitement, not fear. She couldn't believe she had done that. For a few minutes, she had forgotten about the bills she had to pay, the pain in her back, and the strict rules of her job. She had just made music for the sheer joy of it. She stood up, carefully pushing the bench back to its exact original position. She ran her hand over the smooth top of the piano. "Thank you," she whispered to it. She felt a sudden pang of guilt. What if Julian found out? What if he could hear that she had played it? She looked at the keys, terrified she might have left them dirty. She took her cleaning cloth and gently wiped the keys she had touched, polishing them until they shone. She looked around the room one last time. Everything was perfect. The books were dusted, the floor was vacuumed, and the piano was gleaming. To anyone else, the room would look exactly the same as it had an hour ago. But Alina knew it was different. The room had a secret now. The air still felt like it was vibrating with the ghosts of the ragtime. Tuned out, Alina picked up her yellow gloves and her cleaning bucket. She walked to the door, feeling lighter than she had when she walked in. She felt like she had pulled a fast one on the serious, strict world. She had brought a little bit of messy, happy life into a place that was obsessed with being perfect. She stepped out into the hallway and closed the door, locking it behind her. She didn't know that she had left something behind on that piano, something more than just fingerprints. She had left a feeling, and she certainly didn't know that Julian was coming back earlier than she expected. coming back to find that his perfect world had been touched by a little bit of magic as she walked down the hall to the elevator, humming the last few bars of her song. The story was already turning toward the next chapter. The elevator ride up felt like it took forever. Julian pressed the button for the top floor repeatedly, as if his impatient fingers could make the machine move faster. He was in a bad mood. The coffee shop near the park had gotten his order wrong, giving him a latte instead of an Americano, and the noise of the traffic on the street had given him a headache. He felt raw, like his skin was rubbed thin. All he wanted was the cool, silent safety of his apartment. He wanted the white walls and the locked door. He wanted to sit at his piano and play scales until his brain stopped hurting. When the elevator doors finally slid open, the hallway was quiet. It always was. But as Julian walked toward his front door, he stopped. He tilted his head to the side. He frowned. He could hear something. It was faint, muffled by the thick wooden door, but it was definitely there. It was music. And it wasn't just any music. It wasn't the serious, heavy classical music that usually filled his home. It was fast. It was jumpy. It sounded happy. Julian felt a flash of irritation. Had the cleaning lady turned on the radio? He had specifically told her no noise. He tightened his grip on his wet umbrella and reached for his keys. He was ready to march in there and demand silence. But as he put the key in the lock, the sound changed. It wasn't a radio. The rhythm stuttered for a split second, a tiny human mistake that a recording wouldn't make. Someone was playing his piano. A cold shock went through him. He unlocked the door and pushed it open slowly, trying not to make a sound. He stepped into the entryway and closed the door behind him without clicking the latch. The sound washed over him, loud and clear now. It was coming from the living room. It was a chaotic, messy tune, full of energy and joy. Julian crept forward, his heart beating hard in his chest. Who was in here, a thief? A rival pianist playing a prank? He reached the archway of the living room and stopped dead. Alina was sitting at his piano. She had her back to him, swaying side to side like a tree in the wind. Her head was tilted back, her eyes were closed, and a huge smile lit up her face. She was playing with both hands, her fingers flying over the keys in a way that was completely different from how Julian played. She was hitting the keys hard, almost banging on them, but the result was a rhythm that made you want to tap your foot. She was playing a ragtime song, the kind of music people dance to in old-fashioned movies. Julian stared. He felt like he was watching a ghost. This was his sanctuary. This was the altar of his art. And here was this woman, with her yellow cleaning gloves sitting on the floor and her uniform dress slightly wrinkled. Treating his instrument like a toy in a playground, she didn't notice him. She was lost in the music. She hit a wrong note, a jarring sound that made Julian wince butt. She just laughed, a soft, breathy sound, and kept playing, improvising around the mistake. For a second, Julian didn't know what to feel. He was angry, yes. She had broken his rule. She had touched the piano. But underneath the anger, there was something else. Confusion. He watched her hands. They weren't the polished, elegant hands of a concert pianist. They were rough worker's hands. But they moved with a confidence he hadn't seen in years. She wasn't thinking. She wasn't calculating. She was just feeling. Then the song reached a loud, crashing ending. Alina slapped her hands down on the final chord, her foot pressing hard on the pedal. The sound rang out, bold and brassy. She sat there for a moment, breathing hard, her hands hovering over the keys. Wow, she whispered to herself. Yes, wow. Julian's voice cut through the air like a knife. Alina jumped as if she had been electrocuted. She practically flew off the bench, spinning around to face him. Her face went from joyful white to terrified red in a second. Her eyes went wide, and she clutching her chest. Mr. Thorne. She gasped. I didn't hear you. Julian walked slowly into the room. He didn't yell. That was the scary thing. He was very calm. He looked at her, then at the piano, then back at her. He saw the fear in her eyes. She looked like a child caught with her hand in the cookie jar. Except the cookie jar was a $100,000 instrument, and the cookie was a melody. I told you not to touch the piano, Julian said quietly. His voice was low and dangerous. "I know," Elena stammered, twisting her hands together. "I am so sorry. I was just finishing up, and it looked so beautiful, and I just wanted to hear one note. And then my fingers just... I am sorry. Please don't fire me. I need this job." She looked down at the floor, waiting for him to scream. She expected him to throw her out. She expected him to tell the agency she was careless. But Julian didn't scream. He looked at the piano keys, then he looked at Elena's trembling hands. Suddenly, a strange bubble of emotion rose in his chest. It was so absurd. The contrast between them was ridiculous. Here he was, the master of the piano, the man who practiced 10 hours a day for perfection, and he was miserable. And here was the cleaning lady who couldn't read a note of music. Playing with more soul in 5 minutes than he had shown in 5 years, the absurdity of it struck him. So hard that he couldn't hold it back, he let out a sound. It started as a huff, and then it grew louder. He laughed. It wasn't a warm, friendly laugh. It was a sharp, cynical laugh. It was the kind of laugh you make when you see a clown trip over his own shoes. It was mocking. It was cold. "You," he said, laughing again. "You think that was music?" Elena looked up, hurt flashing in her eyes. "I was just playing for fun." Julian walked past her and sat down on the bench. He didn't look at her. He looked at the keys. That wasn't music. That was noise. It was a mess. You missed half the notes. Your timing was terrible. You were banging on the keys like they owed you money. Elena felt her face get hot. She knew she wasn't a professional, but hearing him say it like that hurt. "It made me happy," she said quietly. "It sounded nice to me." Julian stopped laughing abruptly. He turned his head to look at her. "Nice. A McDonald's hamburger is nice. A cheap t-shirt is nice. This is a Steinway. It is a tool for greatness, not a toy for nice feelings." He placed his long, pale fingers on the keys. "You want to know what music is? Watch." He lifted his hands and began to play. He played the same melody Elena had just played, but he changed it. He cleaned it up. He smoothed out the rhythm. He played the notes with absolute precision. It was fast, it was complicated, and it was technically flawless. But it sounded cold. It sounded like a robot reciting a poem. He played for a minute, showing off his speed. He looked at Elena out of the corner of his eye, expecting her to look impressed. He expected her to be awed by his superiority. Elena listened. She had to admit he was fast. His fingers were like spiders. But the music didn't make her want to dance. It made her feel anxious. It felt like he was racing against a clock. It felt angry. Julian stopped playing, letting the last note hang perfectly in the air. He turned on the bench to face her, a smirk on his face. "Do you hear the difference?" he asked arrogantly. "That is discipline. That is control. That is art. What you did was just... chaos." Elena looked at him. She was still scared of losing her job, but something inside her prickled. She didn't like being treated like she was stupid. "It was fast," she said. "I will give you that. It was very fast." "Fast." Julian rolled his eyes. "It is not about speed. It is about structure," it felt. "Tight," Elena said bravely, like it was holding its breath. Julian's smirk faded. He stared at her. How dare she? She was a cleaning lady. What did she know about breath? "You are talking about things you do not understand," he snapped. "You are just a person who cleans floors. You don't know the first thing about the theory, the harmony, the complexity of what I do." "Maybe," Elena said, her voice gaining a little strength. "But I know that music is supposed to make you feel something. And when I played, I felt happy. When you played, it felt like you were angry at the piano." Julian stood up abruptly. The comment stung him more than he wanted to admit. He felt a flash of genuine anger. "You are arrogant," he said. "You think because you can bang out a ragtime tune, you understand the soul of this instrument?" He sat back down heavily. "Fine. You want to play?" "Let's play. I should go," Elena said, taking a step back toward her cleaning bucket. "Still," Julian commanded. Sit. He slid over on the bench, making room. It was a tiny bench, barely big enough for one person, let alone two. He patted the empty spot. Sit down. If you are going to play my piano, you are going to do it properly. I want to show you how wrong you are. Alina hesitated. Every instinct told her to grab her bag and run. But there was something in Julian's eyes, a desperate loneliness, a need to prove himself that made her stay. She slowly walked over and sat down on the edge of the bench. She felt small next to him. He smelled of expensive cologne and rain. Play your little song, Julian ordered, and try to keep up with me. If you miss a beat, I stop and you are fired. The stakes were high. Elena's heart was pounding against her ribs. This was a test she hadn't studied for. It was a trap. "Okay," she whispered. She placed her hands on the keys. Her hands were shaking. Julian placed his hands near the middle of the keyboard, ready to strike. "Go," he said. Alina took a deep breath and started. She began the same bouncy melody she had played before. She tried to concentrate, to hit the right notes, but she was terrified. She stumbled on the third note. Immediately, Julian's hands came crashing down. He didn't play along with her. He played over her. The battle on the piano bench continued. Julian was throwing every trick he knew at Alina. He played fast runs that went up and down the keyboard like a roller coaster. He played chords that were thick and heavy, like blocks of stone dropping. He was determined to prove that his technical skill was superior, that he was the master, and she was just an amateur. He expected her to crumble. He expected her to stop in shame because she couldn't keep up with his speed. But Alina didn't crumble. She didn't try to copy his complicated, fast notes. She knew she couldn't play like that. Instead, she did something smarter. She became the floor he walked on. When he went high and fast, she stayed low and steady. She played a strong heartbeat rhythm on the left side of the piano. Thump, thump. It was simple, but it was unbreakable. Julian found himself getting frustrated. He played faster, trying to mess her up. He played weird, jarring notes to throw her off balance. But Alina just smiled. She treated his angry notes like a game. If he played something sharp and mean, she answered with something round and soft. If he played a dark, sad chord, she played a little twinkling sound that sounded like a giggle. It was maddening. It was like he was trying to punch a cloud. No matter how hard he hit, the music just bounced back, happy and alive. And then something strange happened. Julian stopped thinking about winning. For so long, music had been a test. It was a list of rules he had to follow. It was about not making mistakes. But with Alina sitting next to him, hitting wrong notes and laughing, the pressure suddenly vanished. He realized that if she could play a wrong note and the world didn't end, maybe he could too. He heard the rhythm she was playing. It was so solid. It felt good. He felt his own hands relax. He stopped trying to attack the piano and started to listen to what she was doing. He let his fingers float a little bit more. Instead of playing a complicated scale that was written in a book, he started to make up a tune that fit her tune. Alina felt the change instantly. The tension in Julian's shoulder disappeared. He wasn't stiff anymore. He was leaning into the music. She looked at him out of the corner of her eye and saw that his frown was gone. His eyes were wide, staring at the keys, but with a look of wonder instead of anger. They were playing a duet now. It wasn't a fight anymore. It was a conversation. It was like two people talking who realized they spoke the same language, just with different accents. Julian played a line of notes that was questioning, like he was asking, "What if we go here?" Alina answered him immediately with a bouncy little riff that said, "Yes, let's go there." Julian felt a shock go through his body. It was a feeling of excitement he hadn't felt in 10 years. He played again, this time taking a risk. He played a note that was wrong according to the classical rules. It was a blue note, a jazzy note that he had been taught never to touch. Alina laughed out loud. It was a delighted sound. She hit the keys a little harder, matching his energy. The music swelled. It filled the room, but it wasn't heavy anymore. The air in the apartment felt lighter. The white wall seemed to warm up. They played together for 20 minutes. The sun outside dipped lower, turning the light in the room from gold to orange. The city traffic roared far below, but inside, there was a different kind of roar. It was the sound of the two of them weaving their worlds together. Julian was playing things he had never played before. He was mixing his fancy classical training with Elena's ragtime spirit. He was playing fast, but it wasn't cold. It was hot and energetic. He felt sweat on his forehead, but not from stress. It was from fun. He was actually having fun. He looked at Elena's hands on the keys. They were not elegant. They were red and rough, with short nails, but they had power. They had a story to tell. He realized that his hands were the ones that were weak. They were weak because they were scared of making a mistake. Her hands were strong because they didn't care about mistakes. "Keep going," Julian whispered. He didn't realize he had said it out loud. Elena didn't hear him. She was too lost in the music. She swung her body to the left, then to the right. She was stomping her foot on the pedal. She wasn't sitting like a stiff statue like the teachers at the music school. She was moving with the music. Julian decided to try it. He let his body move. He swayed a little bit. He lifted his elbow. It felt strange, like taking off a tight pair of shoes after a long day. It felt freeing. The music built up to a climax. They were playing fast, louder and louder. It was a chaotic mix of high notes and low notes, fast runs and slow beats. It shouldn't have worked. On paper, it was a mess. But in the air, it was perfect. It was the sound of perfection colliding with humanity. Julian felt a laugh bubbling up in his chest. He tried to push it down because he was a serious pianist, but he couldn't. The laugh burst out of him. He wasn't laughing at Elena this time. He was laughing with her. Elena heard him laugh, and she laughed too. Their laughter mixed with the piano music. It was a wild, happy sound. They were flying. They were racing to the end of the song, neither one knowing where it was going. But both trusting that they would get there, Julian slammed down a final chord. And at the exact same second, Elena hit the bass keys. The sound was huge. It shook the windows. It rang in their ears. They stopped. Julian lifted his hands off the keys. His fingers were tingling. His heart was hammering against his ribs like a bird in a cage. He sat there, staring at the wall, breathing hard. He felt dizzy. The silence that followed wasn't the heavy, empty silence he was used to. This silence was buzzing. It was alive. It felt like the air was still vibrating with the energy of what they had just done. He turned his head to look at Elena. She was wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. She was grinning from ear to ear, her teeth white, her eyes sparkling. She looked exhausted but happy. She said, turning to look at him. That was fast. Julian looked at her. He felt like he was seeing her for the first time. She wasn't just the cleaning lady anymore. She was a musician. She was a teacher. Yes, Julian said. His voice sounded raspy. It was unexpected. He looked down at the piano keys. They were blurry. He realized his eyes were wet. He quickly rubbed his eyes with his sleeve, hoping she wouldn't notice. He felt a lump in his throat. He couldn't remember the last time he had enjoyed playing that much. He couldn't remember the last time he had played something that wasn't written down for him 100 years ago. I was trying to beat you, Julian admitted quietly. It was hard for him to say it. He was not used to admitting weakness. I know, Elena said softly. Her voice wasn't mocking. It was kind. You were playing very angry notes. I know, Julian said. He let out a short breath. I have been angry for a long time. I didn't realize it until just now. Why were you angry? Elena asked. She didn't look at him like he was a genius. She looked at him like he was a confused person who needed help. Julian thought about it. He looked around his perfect white apartment. I think I was trying to be perfect. And it is very tiring to be perfect, Elena nodded. She patted the top of the piano. Nothing perfect is real, she said. Look at this piano. It is made of wood and wire and felt. It is natural. It has bumps. If you try to make it perfect, you break it. You have to let it be what it is. Julian looked at the piano. He touched the smooth wood. He had always treated the piano like a machine that had to perform for him. He had never treated it like a partner. "I think you are right," he said. The mood in the room had completely changed. The wall that separated them was gone. Julian didn't feel like he was the king of the castle and she was the servant. They were just two people who had shared something incredible. "You know," Julian said, a small smile creeping onto his face, "you play terrible rhythm." "It is all over the place," Alina laughed. "And you play like a robot with a stick up his back." Julian blinked, and then he laughed. A real, genuine laugh. It felt foreign in his throat, but it felt good. "Yes, I suppose I do." He stood up from the bench. His legs felt a little wobbly. He walked over to the window and looked out at the city. The lights were coming on. Cars were moving like blood cells through the veins of the city. It didn't look like a gray mess anymore. It looked like a painting full of movement, Alina, Julian said, turning back to her. Alina stood up and picked up her cleaning gloves. "Yes, Mr. Thorne." "Please stop calling me Mr. Thorne. My name is Julian." Lena smiled. "Okay, Julian." And Julian said, hesitating. He felt awkward, but he knew he needed to say this. "I am sorry I was rude to you, and I am sorry I laughed at you earlier." "You are a better musician than I thought," Lena beamed. The compliment made her stand a little taller. "Thank you, Julian. And you are not as boring as you look." Julian chuckled. "I will take that as a compliment." He looked at the clock on the wall. It was late. He should have been practicing his concerto. He should have been stressing about the next day, but he didn't want to. He wanted to stay in this feeling. He realized that the music he was supposed to play, the famous, difficult concerto, felt meaningless now. It was just notes. What he had just played with Alina had meaning. It had soul. "You know," Julian said, walking back toward the piano, "I have a concert coming up. A very big one. I am supposed to play a piece that is very serious. Very sad." Alina looked at him. "You don't sound very excited about it."